Joining us now on the program, as he always does each and every week to talk about the latest in Michigan and federal politics, is Dave Dulio, professor of political science at Oakland University, where he also serves as their director for the Center for Civic Engagement. Dave, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, good morning, Tyler.
Good morning to you as well. And it's, of course, a great Wednesday morning when we have big political news that comes in late on Tuesday. And that this week is President Joe Biden announcing his campaign for re-election in the 2024 election cycle, announcing that online on Tuesday evening. And one of the main issues he was really talking about as being a pillar of his re-election campaign is the economy. What about the timing right now, making that election, do you think played into Joe Biden announcing this re-election? It seemed like for a while that he was hinting at that, and it seemed like a foregone conclusion. He's going to announce that he's running for re-election, but how much did the Trump indictment and other political storms of late play into, in your opinion, Joe Biden waiting until now to make that announcement?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple. As you mentioned, it was alluded to many times. I think he did more than hint at it. He, said from the beginning that he intended to run for re-election. I think it was made yesterday because that was the 4-year anniversary of his initial statement that he was going to run for president. So it's a nice anniversary, if you will.
Yeah, he would, should he be reelected, would extend his record of being the oldest person to sit in the Oval Office. He would be 82 on Inauguration Day in 2025. And as candidates are filing into this election, both on the Republican and the Democratic side, it's presumed it's going to be Joe Biden, as would normally be for a re-election campaign on the Democratic side of the ticket, but still kind of up in the air on the Republican side. But we could potentially have, once again, the matchup of two presidential candidates that could be among the oldest, or would be among the oldest in the history of that position. In terms of Joe Biden now finally announcing that candidacy, how does that impact the Republican field, with Ron DeSantis potentially announcing down the line, Donald Trump already in the race, and others, including Tim Scott from Florida, exploring potential runs for the office?
Yeah, I don't think Biden's entrance with his announcement yesterday does much on the Republican side. I think that this is going to be Trump versus everybody else. And even to the point where I think Republicans who don't want Trump to be the nominee are going to have to find a Trump alternative and one Trump alternative to get behind, because Trump's base of support is too big at the moment for anybody else to defeat him if those Trump alternatives are not rallying around the one person at this point.
And in terms of Joe Biden on the Democratic side of the ticket, although he's the sitting president, he's going to be the incumbent candidate in the 2024 election. That doesn't come without some heat on his side. His approval rating could certainly be better, and there's frustration even within the Democratic Party towards some of the actions he has or has not taken as president of the United States, with some claiming he's not been progressive enough, or he's backtracked on some of those pillar points of his 2020 campaign. So what are some of those main concerns going into 2024 for Joe Biden to get those Democratic voters back, but in particular, keep the support of the progressive wing of the party?
Yeah, I think it's even more fundamental than policy alternatives that are offered. I think that if you look at the polling that's out there among the Democratic primary electorate, large percentages don't want him to run again. And I think that's an important thing to note here, especially if we look on the Republican side, right? The front runner now is Trump, and large majorities don't want him to run again. So if we end up with a Biden-Trump rematch, it's going to be terribly disappointing to a large portion of the country. But I think age is a factor on the Democratic side for folks that are looking for something new, right? He's been around politics for half a century. And I think Democrats are just looking for some new blood, maybe a new voice. But you know what? He's the nominee. Robert Kennedy Jr. is not going to beat him. Marianne Williamson certainly isn't going to beat him. They might make it more difficult for him, but he's the nominee. Nobody with real credibility has said they're going to run, and they're not going to. Who's going to challenge him? Who's going to challenge a sitting president that's in a position of power, right? Bernie Sanders said the other day he's not going to do it. Elizabeth Warren, not going to do it. And then we get to folks like Kamala Harris, the sitting vice president, isn't going to challenge her boss. Pete Buttigieg, Secretary of Transportation, isn't going to challenge his boss. So it's Biden, right? And Democrats are, for better or worse, are going to be stuck with Biden. And then it becomes really interesting who does what on the Republican side.
And it's also interesting to consider, as you say, Biden may have to do more to reach out to that progressive side of the party to reinvigorate that support that he had in parts of the 2020 election, although not the entirety of it within his party. And with that being the case, looking at more of an establishment candidate on the ticket with him in 2020, and Kamala Harris, his current vice president. She was featured a lot throughout his announcement video yesterday, so you'd presume that she's going to continue to be his VP going forward and be his running mate in 2024. But could that also play a factor into this election in trying to capture that wing of the party and get that youth movement involved in his campaign to go to maybe a different vice presidential candidate?
Oh, I don't think you're seeing anybody replace the sitting vice president. She's on the ticket. That would be a huge decision, and I think blunder for Joe Biden. Talk about doing something to turn off your base. It would be ditching a historic choice in Kamala Harris for vice president. I think. And I think she could be an issue in the general election, no matter who is nominated on the Republican side. I think both Biden and Harris's approval ratings are really low. I think she's not held in very high esteem by a great many Americans. I think that you could see, if let's say it's Ron DeSantis as the GOP nominee, right? He can make age a real issue, and talk about Biden's advanced years and the fact that he's been around, as I said, for 50 years in politics, and even say to the vice president, look, or say to Americans about the vice president, do you want Kamala Harris to be in charge if Biden has to step aside?
And that could also be pointed in the other direction, too, and that will play a big factor, I would think, for independent voters, should you have a Trump or DeSantis candidacy in the GOP, as who is that next in line with them, because that also is going to have an impact on politics going forward, especially for a guy like Donald Trump facing the legal scrutiny that he's under and will presumably continue to be under that microscope should the House and the Senate remain in the same leadership and he be president once again, and knowing that Mike Pence is very, very unlikely to be on the ballot with Donald Trump again. Yeah. So how could that play in more on the Republican side, finding that right candidate to be a counter to Kamala Harris, but also help to put that really pointed attack on the Biden campaign?
So I think it's important to note, right, that if Trump is the nominee running against Biden, I think the age issue comes off the table because they're both old, right? But if it's DeSantis, he's got an advantage over Biden, and I think I think he'll make it like I said, a focal point of the campaign. I think Trump and DeSantis would be looking for different things entirely from a running mate, right? Trump, yeah, he was president for 4 years. He has, experience, but he's not a creature of Washington. And to get anything done there, you need somebody who knows how that town works. DeSantis served in the House, not a huge role, but he's been around Washington. He may look for I think would look for something else, maybe somebody to try and bring in that Trump base if they're showing signs of not rallying around DeSantis, maybe the way that his campaign would hope.
We're joined by Dave Dulio on today's edition of the Megacast, professor of political science at Oakland University and the director of Oakland University's Center for Civic Engagement. Other big news of late since we last spoke was a $787,500,000 settlement between Dominion Voting Systems and Fox News, and some shakeups too at Fox News and CNN this week, with Don Lemon being let go by CNN and Tucker Carlson and Fox News splitting up this week as well. And that kind of speaks to the impact of 24-hour news and cable news on our political landscape, because on both sides of the aisle, with CNN leaning more to the left and Republican side being more in favor of Fox News, having those big personalities leave, especially Tucker Carlson for Fox News, how does that impact how does that play into Fox News' continued impact going forward, with the pressure that's already on them from the lawsuit, with now their most popular host going away, potentially going to a competitor? You look at somebody like OAN, or certainly at Newsmax, that's even further to the right. How could that also play into particularly those Republican politics?
Yeah, I think let's deal with OAN and Newsmax first. I think the big thing with them is they're losing access to households, right? I mean, through different streaming services that are not carrying them anymore. I think that's an important factor here. But Fox lost, as you mentioned, their most popular host, right? I mean, Tucker Carlson absolutely killed it when it came to ratings. Now, that 8 p.m. slot is very, very valuable for Fox. It's highly coveted, and it will remain important if they can find the right person to fill that slot. And I think that I would imagine that they're going to take their time and put in a bunch of research into this to find out who out there in the media landscape can not fill the void, but can maximize the value of that hour segment.
Yeah, they'll have floating hosts in that 8 p.m. segment going forward. It'll be a variety of different people until they narrow down who will be taking over Tucker Carlson's time slot. It was estimated this week that to Fox News, Tucker Carlson, just as a media personality and given his popularity, worth upwards of just below $700 million to that organization in terms of the revenue they brought in. So going to have a huge factor on Fox News, which of course has a big factor in Republican politics and on that side of the aisle, but plenty more will certainly come down the pike in the very near future to impact us now and in 2024. Dave, thank you so much as always for being with us.
Thanks for having me.